Hi, everybody. Welcome to this interview with Chris Herin.
Carry the heart of you.
You might know him from Tiles. It's a band from Michigan, a quartet, prog rock band, but this is his solo effort. He's got a new album coming out called Hiding in Plain Sight. It's in November. He's got a whole list of guests, which is actually what caught my eye because I'm a big Rush fan, and I know that Tiles is very actually. I'll start right away saying I was listening to Tiles, their new band to me. I definitely hear the Rush influence, but you're totally unique. It's great that you're able to do that without sounding like a clone or an imitation. Well done. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast. I'm looking forward to talking about your new album and also Tiles a bit, and just whatever we happen to talk about. That's fine.
Well, thanks, Dean. Glad to be here and appreciate your interest.
Great, great. So why don't we start off with Hiding in Plain Sight? That's your new solo album. This is your first solo album, is that right?
Yes, it is.
So what's the motivation to have a solo album?
Completely accidental. I throughout the years I had demoed quite a few songs off and on, and there was quite a batch left over after we finished Pretending to Run, which was our album and came out in 2016. And I worked with the producer, Terry Brown, and we had roughed in a bunch of these songs with just the main guitar part and some little drum loops and things to make it interesting a little bit. And after the Pretending to Run promotional cycle kind of ran its course, I got to thinking, well, these songs I thought they were pretty interesting, still pretty good. So I just went ahead and started working on getting them finished. In the world of Tiles, our lead singer, Paul, ended up retiring in 2018. So the band kind of went on a hiatus. We haven't stuck a fork in it necessarily yet, but in the meantime, I felt like working on these songs, and they had been fleshed out to some extent with my bass playing buddy Kevin Chown, and we just took it from there. I don't sing, so once I started enlisting vocalists, I started enlisting other instruments, especially some of my favorite guitar players. And the project started taking shape that way. Lyrically, I found myself writing a lot about my and my family's experience with my dad's Alzheimer's. And at that point, once all of these lyrics started to be within that same theme, I decided to make it kind of an official focus of the album. So the lyrics deal with different phases that he went through and challenges that we had. And it ended up being an important part of the project. A lot of the people that ended up participating, unfortunately, had similar experiences with some of their family members. So that is not the Cliff's Note version of where the solo album came from. But that's it. It was accidental and kind of grew out of just wanting to finish these songs because I liked them and hoped that they could turn out good.
Hmm. Well, I've listened to two of the tracks, so that's all I had access to for the album. One of them, Michael Sadler was singing, and the other one you had, Peter Frampton was playing guitar throughout the track. That's really cool. How did you make the connection with these fellas to come help with the album?
Well, as you can imagine, someone of Terry's career he's run into a lot of people throughout his career. And he had done a project with Michael Barrett, another guitarist in and around Toronto, that involved Michael Sadler. And I had been a Saga fan for years and years. So I thought, boy, it would be nice to get Michael to sing on one of these songs. And fortunately, he was interested. And the same thing with Peter Frampton. Terry had worked with Peter on a project with one of the other bands he works with, Blurred Vision. They had, I think there was a John Lennon song that they had remade for a John Lennon tribute project. Blurred Vision singer is actually married to Molly Marriott, Steve Marriott's daughter. So of course there's the Humble Pie connection, and that's how Peter got involved, and he contributed a solo to that project, and that's where he and Terry had made a connection. So I asked Terry, I said, boy, I'm a big fan of Peter Frampton for years and years too, of course. I wonder if he would be interested. And fortunately, he liked the song, and he was interested, and you heard the results. It's quintessential Peter Frampton for sure.
Is Alex Lifeson involved in this album?
Yes, he is.
He's one of my, my heroes. So how about you? Who are your guitar heroes?
Oh yeah, I've been an Alex Lifeson fan since day one of my teenage years when Farewell to Kings came out. And once again, with Terry Brown in your corner, he approached Alex for one of the songs, and Alex liked the song and felt it gave him a lot of freedom. You probably wouldn't know it was him if you weren't told it was him, unless you were really familiar with what he does with soundscapes and textures and things. So there's not a guitar solo or anything that you could really pinpoint that it's him, but he does these really great sounding, like I said, the atmospheric things. When we first heard all of his tracks, and Terry was blending them into the mix, it was really quite stunning. But we had coaxed Alex into playing on a song for the Tiles album, Flypaper, that came out in 2008. So he's been very kind to accept our invitations.
Tell me a lot about you. You said in the promo it was mentioning your dad and his challenge with Alzheimer's, and how that impacted the whole family and you. And is that true? You're actually donating some proceeds from the album sales to the Alzheimer's charities kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. Yeah.
And makes me a little nervous because I want to make sure that at some point in time, the project generates enough. And of course, I got a little bit of an advance from the record company, so that's going to go straight to the donation. But I want to really do justice to the people that contributed their time and talents to the project. Did you get the whole rundown of all the special guests?
Yeah, I did. It was a long one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I got to the last song, and Ken, the owner of the label, scolded me because he said, well, you didn't do any of your own solos. I said, well, no, I wasn't so worried about it, because when you've got people like Martin Barr and Peter Frampton and Kim Mitchell and all these guys playing solos, it's kind of a thrill to hand it off to them, right? So I ended up doing one solo ultimately at the very end. But of course, it's all my guitar playing and stuff. So the reason I'm not really nervous, but I just want to make sure that I do justice and make a meaningful donation to the Alzheimer's Association in everyone's name.
So you're in Michigan, of course. Right now, I'm actually in Vancouver Island, far from Ontario, but I grew up in Ontario. So I guess I take it you grew up in the Michigan area. Obviously, Toronto's we're kind of neighbors, America and Canada there.
Oh yeah, I grew up in the Detroit area, and we knew Canada was a different country, but it didn't seem like a big deal whether you went to Ohio or went to Canada. So we reaped the benefit, of course, of Canadian content laws. So we would hear the Canadian radio stations playing believe it or not, CKLW playing Closer to the Heart, which was a pop station, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I knew of Rush anyway, but certainly the Canadian bands trickled over, Saga, Rush, Max Webster. Anyway, so yeah, there's that close association. Toronto's only 4 hours away, and Windsor's just across the river, and we would see concerts in Windsor of Canadian bands that weren't big enough in the States yet to cross the border and do shows, so we could still catch them in Canada.
So I was curious about the songwriting aspect. The tracks that I've listened to are pretty strong as far as melody. And I didn't pay close attention to the lyrics. I generally, I'm not a big lyric person, but tell me about the songwriting, including the lyrics too, especially if you mentioned they're, coming out of your experience with your dad and stuff. How did the songs all evolve for you?
Well, usually it starts with, you as a songwriter, it's probably not too dissimilar. Interesting guitar ideas that stick in my brain. And then some of the songs come out in a stream of consciousness way sometimes. Others, it's a little bit of mixing and matching parts that seem to go together. Thanks to, of course, digital technology, the songs have morphed quite significantly from their original demo stage because you can add some measures, you can change sections in the computer. So once the basics structure is done, then I tend to write the vocal melodies without lyrics. That way, the vocal melodies aren't necessarily constrained by what the lyrics actually are. And then I'll write the lyrics to those melodies that I had come up with. It kind of happened organically with the lyrics. I just found myself, I had probably two or three of them written, and they were all that same theme, looking back on certain moments with my dad. And from that point on, I just kept writing in that vein. Maybe a lot of it was kind of coincidence, because that was just what was coming out for some reason. But songwriting wise, there's a refinement period, as you know, and even as the songs develop further, I remember the one song that the Crownlands guys sing and play on, Slow to Crumble. We had the chorus was set up a certain way, and it just seemed like at the end of each phrase, there was this gap, and it seemed really like the momentum just got lost after every phrase. And so I asked Terry, I said, well, can we just cut this measure out and cut this other measure out and tighten this up a little bit? And we were able to. So it's kind of like the songwriting doesn't end until it ends, I guess you'd say.
Right. And also, when you're writing your lyrics, is it kind of cathartic for you? Like, is it helping you to deal with what happened, a healing kind of experience, or did you learn about something about yourself even as you were writing about these things?
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I think I did. Not every song, of course. Um, there's one song in particular that closes out the album was really kind of difficult. And there's the very last line. I don't want to give it away. Not that it's that significant, but um, it kind of harkened back to that very moment when we had got back from the neurologists, and he had diagnosed my dad with Alzheimer's. And I just remember so vividly sitting there at the kitchen table, wondering if he really was processing what was going on. I mean, in a way, you kind of hope he wasn't, because my family had never had any experience with dementia or Alzheimer's diseases.
Mhm.
So we were pretty confused what was going on with his behavior. And so it wasn't until he was somewhat advanced that we got the formal diagnosis. So it was definitely kind of, as you say, cathartic to put that moment into words. Because, he had just essentially received a death sentence. Because there's, as everyone knows, there's no cure. I mean, and he passed away in 2011. So, looking back, brought a lot of that actual, moment in time in focus pretty dramatically.
I'm curious about Terry Brown, working with Terry Brown as a producer. And he's worked with the Tiles as well, or Tiles, you worked with Terry before, right?
Yes, we
Yeah.
started working with Terry way back on when he mixed our second album in 1997. So we've had a great working relationship all these years.
How do you find the general state of the music business right now? What advantages do you find now that exist that didn't exist before?
Well, I'll answer that first question by saying it's confusing to a late middle-aged guy like myself. When we first were releasing music in the 90s, mid 90s, it was a CD. We caught the tail end of cassettes. So for our first 4 or 5 albums, it was really just CDs, MySpace cropped up, and that started to be a little bit of a promotional tool. Like everything else, it's kind of a double-edged sword. The promotional opportunities are simply endless at this point. But at the same time, like I said, it's awfully daunting. And of course, with streaming and the royalties you get or lack thereof with streaming, it's tough to make any money, I suspect, which is why, bands tour all the time now. They tend to put out albums. Well, I shouldn't say that because I'm a little bit out of touch with the modern business model, because obviously there's many bands that are releasing music and playing small and medium-sized theaters. So there still is a way, of course. But for a part-time project like us, it's not my livelihood or anything. It's gotten more demanding to release music. So good and bad. That's not a very good answer.
I was going to ask about the Tiles, the work it's not the Tiles, it's just called Tiles, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in those days, there was always a gatekeeper, and were you guys signed to a label? Like I meant, you were mentioning in this interview that you've got this label already working with you, but did you, in the early days, were you trying to get a big contract, or were you chasing after that dream or whatever, or how did that evolve with Tiles?
In the early 90s, the drummer Mark Evans and I had been trying to put together a band. So we ended up doing a demo project and having a friend of ours sing vocals on it. I had sent a bunch of cassettes out, which is, of course, nobody advised you ever do that, because you needed a more formal way into the record companies to get on their radar. But I did it anyway. And about 6 months after I sent out a bunch of tapes, I had a voicemail from Gene Simmons. So I remember this vividly too. I came home from work. My wife and I were just in an apartment at that time, and there was a little blinking light, and I hit the light to see what the message was, and there's this big booming voice of Gene Simmons saying how much he liked the demo tape. He was picked up on the Rush influence and liked it. So for a while there, we were signed to a production deal with Simmons Records. And in the early 90s, that was a period when the record companies were consolidating and this and that he never got a distribution deal for his phase 2 of Simmons record. But what that did was that kind of made me think, well, geez, maybe there's something to this that I should keep going with. And that was the impetus to really move forward and put a band together, which became Tiles. So we put out our first album, self-released, and it got into the hands of some people in Europe. And we ended up getting a licensing deal with Polydor Records in Germany. And they released it throughout Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And at the same time, we got a licensing deal in Japan. And the album did really well in Japan. And just through these smaller licensing events, we ended up hooking up with Inside Out Music in 96, 97 for our second album. And of course, now Inside Out is very well known for all their progressive rock. But we were one of the very first bands on their label, and it was a licensing deal, so it wasn't the traditional recording contract. But we had ended up putting out the album from 97, the album from 99, Presence of Mind. And that did real well for us. Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater liked it, and we ended up opening for Dream Theater for 3 weeks in Europe in the fall of 1999. Our fourth album was Window Dressing in 2004, and then Flypaper in 2008. And then we didn't have another studio album until 2016. And by that time, Inside Out was a pretty big label, and we were not really suited for that.
2016, was that the last album that you put out with Tiles then?
Yeah, Pretending to Run. It's a big double concept album thing.
Oh, cool.
We were breaking new ground in the progressive rock world, right, with a double album concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. I mean, a lot of bands did double albums, prog bands, but not all of them. I don't think Rush ever did a double album.
No, they didn't. I guess we could accuse them of being lazy, huh?
Yeah. But we did mention the Beatles. They had the White Album, and I have to look that up on the web. Is that the first band that ever did a double album? I wonder. Because they were so good at doing first, the Beatles,
Right. But back then, a double album ended up being about 60 minutes. Like, yeah. I remember when they started reissuing these albums or issuing these albums on CD, like all of a sudden Goodbye Yellow Brick Road fits on one disc, right?
Yeah.
Because it was only about 60 minutes, even though it was technically you needed two records to cover it. But we didn't set out to do a double album. We had painted ourselves into a corner. It was too long for a single disc, and we didn't want to leave any of the songs off because, of course, we thought they were all great. So we just added a few songs to it, fleshed out the concept, and turned it into 2 45-minute discs.
Oh, that's pretty long. Well, today it seems like people don't sit down and listen to music like they did like when we grew up. There's a lot of competition now for our attention, video games. I mean, my kids spent so much time playing video games when they were younger. It's so different for them. Do you have children?
Yes, I have a 29-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son.
So are they musically inclined at all?
Yes, my son is a very good piano player. He classical piano player. He just graduated from college, and we didn't expect his music to generate scholarships or anything, but it ended up helping with his college because they offered him a scholarship based on his piano skill.
Sweet. Nice.
But he's big into video games too. So, But you're right. He's he's a Spotify guy.
Hmm.
And it's really surprising because as their algorithms associate you like this, you might like that. So now he's a big early Yes fan, and even some of these obscure prog bands from the late '60s and early '70s that I've never even heard of. So, I guess there's some kind of blend in the young people that even though they don't sit down like we were, at least I did, you'd sit down and you'd stare at the album and you'd only have a couple little graphics or a picture of the band or no picture of the band if it was a Led Zeppelin album.
Hmm.
And your imagination would do the rest and stuff.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
I think there's kind of not a resurgence, but well, maybe it's a resurgence with the younger people. And maybe that's the silver lining of a Spotify is that they have an interest in certain things and it expands their awareness of other bands. And I mean, I don't know what he's doing while he's listening to it, but um, clearly he's listening to a lot of music.
What were your influences in general? Like maybe even throughout the phases, maybe what was your early influences? What did you eventually get into? I'd like to know.
All right, sure. Well, Rush, Kansas, big Jethro Tull fan. Because back then it wasn't known as progressive rock. It was just rock. You had Queen and Led Zeppelin and Bad Company and every band you can probably name. There wasn't the segmentation or the labeling of certain styles. And then I think what influences a lot of my songwriting is I'm a big Elton John fan from his 1970 to 75 or 76 years. To me, the songwriting is just incredible. It's kind of overshadowed maybe a little bit by his flamboyant personality and things like that. But because I used to learn try and play the songs on piano by the books and play along and stuff. Very advanced chord progressions and underneath great melodies and stuff. So that was a big influence. The Rush was also a big songwriting influence, and I think that's what at first was kind of a curse because people equated the fact that I was using a lot of the Alex Lifeson approach to chording and arpeggios, the open E and B strings. That was quite a staple of his playing for
Yeah. Yeah.
for a long time. That really caught my attention, and I used it in my playing quite a bit. And also his soloing approach. There was really an interesting combination of melodicism and abandonment.
Chris, we're going to get cut off. I'm sorry. I just realized it's right at the end. Thanks for the interview. I really appreciate it. Sorry we had
Okay,
to cut it short. Thanks for your time, Chris.
okay.
Looking forward to hearing more of your album as that's going to be released in November. And so thanks, Chris Herin, and all the best to you and the rest of your day.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. You too.